Now I want to tell you about the King of the USA. Now, did you know that there was a King of the USA? Did you know that? You might think, well, the U.S. is a democracy. It doesn't have a king. Well, the King of the USA controls every dollar in your pocket. He can do anything he wants with your money. He can make prices go up. He can make prices rise. He can make prices fall. He can make a currency worthless. He can do all of this. Now, usually when an economy goes bad, they blame the president. This always happens. Or when an economy is good, they give the president credit. The truth is, the president usually has nothing to do with it. All right? And we shouldn't even be worried about the president of the United States because the president is an elected official. He can be voted out of office. But the King of the United States cannot be voted out of office. There is no check and balance on the King of the United States. He is not elected, and therefore he cannot be voted out of office. He can destroy your wealth, and there's nothing you can do about it. He can lend billions of dollars to his friends without telling you, both at home and abroad. He can raise the price of food and gasoline and the rent, and you are powerless to stop him. Now, what's it? You don't think there's a king? Sure, there's a King of the USA. He doesn't have to answer to you. How did he become so powerful? How did this king become so powerful? Exactly the same way that Fireman Ed became powerful. And of course, the King of the USA is the Federal Reserve. How did the Federal Reserve become powerful? Just like Fireman Ed. Fireman Ed became mayor by burning down the town. All right? And by creating a series of emergencies. And every emergency, they felt, well, he needs more power. If only Fireman Ed had had more power and more authority, he could have dealt with this. He could have helped things. Well, the Fed is the exact same way. The Fed was created in 1913. Okay? It's only about 100 years old. All right? Only about 100 years old. How does the Fed become so powerful in 100 years? Well, first of all, you've got to remember, the American public is sold on the Fed. How are they sold? How do they sell it to the American public? They sell it to the American public by telling them that the Fed is now there's going to be a central bank, and they're going to come along and they're going to prevent all the recessions and depressions and all the volatility. They're going to manage the economy, and that way there won't be any more recessions. There won't be any more depressions, right? And this was in 1913. What happened in 1929? Not even 20 years later. The Great Depression occurs, less than 20 years after the institution of the Fed. Now, right then, people should have understood that this whole thing's a scam. The Federal Reserve is a complete scam. It's there. First of all, there were two central banks in the U.S. before the Federal Reserve. Before the Fed, there were two. And one of them was put under, you might say, by Andrew Jackson, who said that his greatest accomplishment was destroying the central bank because the central bank was trying to take over the country. But people forget, and people don't know, and they get lulled to sleep, and then we create some fake emergencies, and we can bring the Fed back into power, and this happens in 1913. Now, of course, who created the Fed? Who's behind it? The Fed is created by the big banks. That's right. In other words, they sold it to the American people by telling you that the Fed was going to protect you, the American people, from the economy. But the economy gets more and more crazy, and the more involved the Fed gets, the more crazy it gets. It's just like Fireman Ed. And every time things go wrong, the Fed becomes more powerful. They ask for and they are granted more power. This has been happening recently as well. So the Fed is now running the show. Okay? Now this is amazing, isn't it? But who created the Fed? It was the big bankers. The big bankers said, if we need to have a central bank so that if we ever screw up, somebody will be there to bail us out. We'll tell the American people that the Fed is there for their sake, and that way we'll convince them to accept it. But really, the Fed's there for us. That way, we can do whatever we want, and we can We can do all kinds of crazy things with our money. We can place wild bets, and if we screw up, we will be bailed out because the Fed will be there. We'll create the Fed for us. It's created by the wealthy and for the wealthy, and it's not for me, and it's not for you. It's against us. Okay? Now, let's get to this whole part about screwing the little people, because that's kind of interesting. How are they going to do that? They actually managed to do this. What I have to teach you very briefly here, and it's not hard, is the difference between real wages and nominal wages. Bear with me. This is not hard. And I'm going to keep everything simple. Bear with me for just a second. It's a con game. They're going to play a con game with you. By the way, I included some great quotes about currencies along the way. I love this one from Ernest Hemingway. The first panacea for a mismanaged nation is inflation of the currency. The second is war. Both bring a temporary prosperity. Both bring permanent ruin. But both are the refuge of political and economic opportunists. That's the inflation of the currency and war. So how are they going to con the American people? How are they going to screw the 99%, so to speak? And the truth is, this is not an Occupy Wall Street thing. This is a Tea Party. It's not a Tea Party thing. Everybody should be furious about this. There are a lot of people that are very unhappy in this country right now. And they're for very good reason, but they don't really know why. They can't put their finger on it. They're kind of mad at Wall Street, but they're not really sure what's the difference between the Federal Reserve and Goldman Sachs and the local bank down at the corner. They don't really, you know what I mean? They haven't fully thought it through. Well, I'll tell you something. Here's how they're going to screw you. Let's say you're making $50,000 a year, which is $24 an hour, approximately. Now you're going to get a raise. Hooray! You're going to get a 2% raise. Your nominal wages go up by 2%. Now you're making more money than ever. But inflation goes up by 3%. So your real wages are +2, that's your raise, -3, that's inflation. You end up with -1. You lose 1% of your wealth. Even though you have more money than you ever had before, you're now 1% poorer. Now, this is actually very close to the recent numbers. The recent numbers mirror this very closely. The recent numbers are this, and the numbers I used for the book this was just from April. Nominal wages overall in the U.S. went up by 1.7%, but inflation was up by 2.6%. So you gain 1.7%, you lose 2.6%. In the end, you are net. You lose 0.9%. Well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong about that? What's wrong is this inflation number is actually much higher. If you think inflation's running at 2% in the U.S. right now, then you might as well just log out now because there's nothing I can do to help you. The inflation numbers are grossly understated, I should say. They're grossly understated. The inflation numbers are not to be believed. The government underreports inflation, so they won't have to give a big raise to everybody who collects a check. Okay, now you know this, most likely. So really, you're getting more money, but you're poorer.